Why, hello. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Ashley Gurvitz, and we are truly thrilled that the Indiana Democratic Party is forging the way of showing our Black excellence across our Indiana's Hoosier state. With that, I'm very thankful that I will be sharing this conversation space today with one of my favorites, my brother. Maybe it's because he's a fellow Aquarian as well, Senator Eddie Melton from Gary, Indiana. So you're probably wondering, what are we doing as far as Black representation, not only within the political spheres, but all across our state, especially in our communities? How are we making a difference? So at this time, I am really thankful. We'll take a moment to introduce that of State Senator Eddie Melton, again from Gary, Indiana, and we will go ahead and go with the flow of our natural conversations. Please
Hey,
know, hi, how are you?
all right, how's it going?
Great, great. I'm so happy we are here together. Excited to be able to help share the facts of Indiana has a lot of Black excellence. And so I'm really happy, Senator will be able to spend some time talking about our experiences.
Yeah, I'm
So
looking forward to it.
likewise. So before we actually get started with the conversation, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge again the Indiana Democratic Party and all of the Democrats across our Hoosier state who is dedicated of equal representation, fighting for equity, and doing everything we can to help promote love. Now, before we get into our questions, Eddie, is there anything you would like to help share?
Well, I want to thank the Democratic Party for inviting me. We know that this is a special month for Black Americans across the country. And for Hoosiers, this is something I think is extremely important to highlight individuals that's doing great work in the state of Indiana. So, I'm happy to be on with you. You do a phenomenal job as a leader in our communities across the state. So it's always a pleasure. And yes, you are my sister, that fellow Aquarian sister. So we share similar timelines of birthdays, but it's a blessing to be able to serve in its capacity as state senator, District 3 here in Indiana, which represents Gary, Maryville, Hobart, Crown Point, Lake Station, and New Chicago. So look forward to jumping into the conversation.
Fabulous. And again, mutual feeling as far as your involvement. And I think we'll be able to touch basis about why I value you through some of the questions we'll ask later. But while we are having our conversation today, I do want to give you an early action item. Please make sure you check into ndems.org/get involved. So you know right away that as Democrats, we welcome everyone who is all about forging and creating opportunities for everyone. Check that out. And while you're doing it, as our Indiana Democratic Party is focused on celebrating Black history and those that are making Black history, there have been great conversations outside of the one we're going to have here today. So we would love to make sure we get your feedback about that and then hopefully share this message so we can get more involved. So with that, I guess we'll go ahead, Senator Melton, and get started.
Yeah, let's
Awesome.
do it.
Awesome. So it looks like we have here different questions we'll cover regarding issues, policies. But before we do that, I think it's really important we take a little time to talk about who we are and what we do. So would you like to get started?
Sure, sounds good. Well, for those that I've never met or never heard of me, my name is Eddie Melton, state senator here in District 3, born and raised in Gary, Indiana. Going into my second term as state senator, so it's definitely a pleasure. As you all may know, we are in our Indiana General Assembly session right now, so we're fighting for Hoosiers across the state. The Indiana Senate Democrats, we've been fighting for equity, we've been fighting for education, fair housing, and so many other issues that resonate with Hoosiers across the state. But one of the things I want to share and talk about most importantly to me as a Black man are the issues that we constantly fight for, in particular in Black and brown communities across the state of Indiana.
Mm.
Ashley, as you know, we across the country had a very difficult summer of protests and individuals in our community as we shared our frustrations and wanting our voices to be heard in the political process. So I'm happy to acknowledge my colleagues and friends at the Indiana Black Legislative Caucus. We've been working tirelessly to speak to Hoosiers across the state, speak to Black leaders across the state, grassroots organizers, to talk about the issues that matter most around systemic racism, around police brutality, around the inequities in education, and so many other issues. That is what helped shape and form my legislative agenda. But personally, it's the issues I've personally experienced growing up in poverty. It's the issues I've personally experienced growing up as a Black man that helped me look at the policy that we're drafting, the policy that we're fighting for, and the policy that we fight against to address a lot of these issues. So it's the person that, the community that has made me, that has helped me become a better legislator. And it's the conversations, it's folks chiming into the legislative process, reaching out to us via social media, via email, phone calls, contacting legislators to talk about the issues that matter to them the most. So, I don't take it for granted being an elected official. At the end of the day, I tell my constituents, I work for you. I'm your representation. I'm your voice in the State House. So always look at that as a sign of someone that's seeking to be a voice for you, to share your voice with them. So I know we'll dive a little deeper into some of those subject matters that we just touched on there, but I'm just extremely excited to be a part of this conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you highlighted on some amazing things and want to definitely make sure we focus in on as well.
Yeah.
It's one thing, as all of us have experienced, whether we were in our living rooms witnessing that of minutes of no, form of life that possibly would be revived with the neck on the knee, right? To different things even happening within our Hoosier state. Being here in Central Indiana, I would be remiss if I did not talk about the efforts, even through chaos around community policing, Dre John Reed, and some of the different factors for there. But you are right, Senator. We can't just make our voice stop at the doorsteps of the places where these systematic oppressions are. With everything, and hopefully this conversation as well, we see that we have the power. There's a lot of Black excellence, no matter the stigmas that could be out there about us. We have the power and the ability to hopefully come alongside you in your legislative agenda. You're doing amazing things here for 2021, and let's do more. Let's make further change. So now, before we get into a question regarding how race has shaped and affected our paths into politics, with that, I want to kind of give a little bit of background relative to social justice and how you can get involved. And one of the beauties about being a Democrat, one thing,
You there? Looks like we lost Ashley there. That's okay. We'll let her get everything together, but the show must go on. Part of Black History Month, I just want to make sure that we talk about some of the uncomfortable conversations that's typically showing up either in the workplace, that's showing up at the State House, or no matter where we are. As we look at celebrating Black history, as we look at honoring those that have paved the way for us, we have to look at individuals like former Congresswoman Julia Carson, individuals like my predecessor, Senator Earlene Rogers, and Mayor Richard Gordon Hatcher, the first Black mayor of a major city here in Gary, Indiana. And the list goes on and on. If it were for these individuals I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in today. And myself and my other colleagues, we recognize and realize that. But another piece that's important as we look at, and my friend Representative Greg Porter said it best just recently, speaking truth to power. That's our responsibility at the end of the day, speaking truth to power, no matter the venue, no matter the location, especially on the Senate floor. I'm sure many of you have heard about the incidents that occurred at the Indiana General Assembly just a few days ago with the House of Representatives, where our Republican colleagues booed many of our Black Caucus members. Actually, I was just sharing a little bit about what took place a few weeks ago with the Black Caucus members, and just how the message that Representative Greg Porter shared with me just reaffirmed the importance of speaking truth to power. And oftentimes it's not easy. But one of the things as a Black elected official that I've learned is that we have to be unapologetic and not looking for an excuse to not speak that truth to power and not allowing fear to get in the way. So while this is being broadcast in various platforms, either on YouTube or Facebook, Twitter, etc., I think it's extremely important for Black Hoosiers across the state of Indiana, but also our allies that look to help fight for justice and help to address inequities, to find and identify those key issues that we were fighting for and working on, and to come alongside us. And just in the next week or so, we're asking folks to come to the State House. Let your voice be heard of the injustice that took place in the House of Representatives the other day. So you got to excuse me, Ashley. I was trying to fill the gap while we were waiting for you to log back in, but
Thank you.
I'm glad you joined us again.
Yes.
But before you got back on, I also acknowledge a lot of the folks that paved the way for us as Black elected officials. You know, I talk about the Honorable, the late great Julia Carson. I talk about late great Mayor Richard Gordon Hatcher, and so many others. The list goes on and on that paved the way for us. And you and I were just talking about the 1972 Black Political Convention that took place in Gary, Indiana, so many years ago. Next year, it'll be 50 years where they had over 8,000 individuals from across the country ascend on Gary to come talk about a Black political agenda. Now, I had to put this in context, right? Think about that time frame. Think about that era. If you look from 1964 and 65 with the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, you fast forward the clock and you see the assassinations of Malcolm X, you see the assassination of Medgar Evers and Dr. King, Fred Hampton, Chairman Fred, and so many other freedom fighters from the early 60s to the mid 60s to the late 60s. Then you have an election of an African-American man in a very diverse city at that time in 68. Then you also look at just a few years after that, 1972, where those 8,000 individuals from across the entire country came to talk about the issues that matter to us the most in the Black community. And it's the same thing that we're fighting for today. Justice, jobs, equality, you know, fighting against police brutality. Same issues to this very day, 50 years later. So, as I transition it back to you, Ashley, I think that's part of a conversation that I hope continue to figure out, where do we go from here? Yes. And how do we empower our communities to be a voice of change and be unapologetic about being Black, being unapologetic about speaking the truth to power, and doing all that we can to fight for justice.
Oh, yeah. And Senator, I'm so thankful you highlighted a momentous historical event for Blacks that happened in the Hoosier State. Now, I don't know if you're feeling like I am, but when I think about the closing numbers, presidential, and to see our state was like one of the first to be called, not for the Democratic favor, right? it's amazing to see within our own backyard those seeds historically, those trailblazers you were talking about. I look at, give me, the fill to keep fighting and
Yeah,
going on. If they were able to
absolutely.
overcome some of the chaos and dramas of the past, this oppressive nature of some of these systematic laws that are enabling hatred, right? We can do
Hmm.
it. And it really speaks to maybe, hey, 50th is here. Can we mobilize where there is 8,000? What beauty would it be if there's representation from all states, including Indiana and the Mecca? You'll want to count us last, but guess what? We're going to be first in making new changes. So I'm thankful to say that. One
Yeah,
thing
absolutely.
before jumping into the next question, just want to share. I think a important thing as Democrats, our rooted values are about change. It is provoking change, and it's how advocacy is formed. Want to highlight the fact of, as I knew the importance of the principles of being a Democrat, I did not realize how I could get involved in this space until after Trayvon Martin.
Hmm.
Speaking to the connections and parallels, whether it's um, Dre John here locally to Breonna Taylor with George Floyd, activation. Hopefully, you can hear from this conversation is your invitation to get involved.
Right.
It was such a incredible thing to see that the one tool that allowed a man to be free after killing someone that was just going to get Skittles and tea.
Hmm.
How can we allow systems like that to impact us and to fill that
Right.
community trauma? So I'm really happy to
It,
know your
it,
continued fight legislatively on that.
well, let me say this, Ashley, because I think it's important too. When we talk about the Black community and politics, the Black community and political structures or the judicial structure, I think there's an embedded distrust when it comes to a lot of these systems. And the one thing I'm learning, the older I get, I'm gonna be very honest with you. I had no desire to be an elected official growing up younger because of the perception of how being quote unquote elected official or a quote unquote politician. Yes, I used to hate. I still do. I don't like that term, right?
Sounds dirty.
So, it, but at the same time, I realize that if we're not involved in the process, if we're not engaged in policy making, even if it's just to rattle the cage
Mm-hmm.
and to yell and fight and scream when we feel like we're not being heard. That's another thing that kind of disturbs me and upsets me when my colleagues across the aisle will say, well, that was in the past. Racism doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true. I could point to multiple examples, personal and testimonies from others, that, yeah, people still feel there's a significant amount of racism or systemic racism in so many different levels of our society, be it in the corporate boardroom, being in the office space, the classroom, or in the state house. So that's the reality of the conversations. And we shouldn't let uh, it be politicized.
Oh yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
this don't politicize or tell us to shut up or be quiet when it's our truth, period.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And even to hear that, for someone to say shut up, we've have had certain elected officials that have emboldened people to know that disrespect and thinking words are going to suppress people. We got to get rid of that.
Yeah.
And what that leads into is a next question I have for you, Senator. How do we see that of changing of who represents us? Can you
Mhm.
talk about the importance of, we'll say that mentor who is with our opportunity youth. Yes, they're opportunity. We're not saying at-risk. There are opportunities. How do we
Yeah.
encourage them who are leading and inspiring and motivating change to find themselves transferring their leadership there to potentially being in an elected official seat in the future?
Yeah, that's a very good question. One of the things that resonates with me on that is the change that I personally see take place in just the Indiana Senate, right? Although we may be small in numbers, right, in the super minority, but we have new leadership in the Senate Democrats. You have the first Black minority leader in Senator Greg Taylor, and I'm happy to join him as assistant minority leader. You have the first Muslim state senator and Senator Fatty Cadora, and you have the first openly gay senator in the state of Indiana, and with Senator J.D. Ford.
Yes.
So the dynamic and the makeup of the General Assembly is shifting. It is changing, and it's encouraging because now, when we look for our comrades in the fight against injustice, and it's starting to reflect the world.
Yes.
America is becoming more and more diverse, even Indiana. But the one thing I would say and put people on safeguards to say is this: as we were recently and still in a pandemic, right, and fighting for issues for voting rights and fighting to make sure that folks participate in the census, we are in the year of redistricting.
Yes.
And we're going to see a lot of political maneuvering to continue to put one party that's still in control, grab more control.
Yes.
And they're going to shift and draw the maps in their favor.
Mm-hmm.
And it may impact the way we're seeing a growth and diversity in both the House and the Senate. So even when there are negative situations, I try to allow that to empower me or inspire me to want to fight more. Because the moment you get comfortable, the moment you get complacent, is when things get taken advantage of or taken over.
Oh yeah. And not only do we have to look at the lens of being taken advantage of, but it speaks to the importance of finding our way to these tables. And the late Bill Crawford would always say, the Honorable Bill Crawford, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And we are at a critical time as these redistricting maps are underway. Even highlighting some of these aggressive tactics right now within, especially our municipalities, where there are large populations of people of color, Black people, right?
Yeah.
These grab attempts is only shaking who they will allow reflects in our assembly. We have to be more available for getting involved. With that, it leads kind of the next question.
Mm-hmm.
You may be new, you've been activated, curious on how to get involved. Can you talk a little bit about your journey of engagement and adding in another layer, like the importance of intergenerational connections? I know Mr. Dearly of here, I know she's enjoying retirement life, but we think about Senator Rogers and everything she's done. But can you highlight that importance, if that may be a good way for people to start getting involved?
Yeah. So first off, I want to commend the younger generation for their tenacity and their fight and fervor for justice.
Yes.
I just hit 40, right? It complicates me to say that, but it's the reality. I thank God that I made it to see 40, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't think I would see 21 growing up in this community I grew up in. That was just the expectation for some. You know, I don't have to go down that road to talk about that. I think some of the viewers know what I mean. But just like you said, right, when Trayvon Martin was killed and the organizing that we've seen from there to Michael Brown and Ferguson, and how people just constantly get frustrated and angered to see these things happen day after day, month after month, year after year. There's a growing generation of folks that's not tolerating that anymore. And they're moving past just airing frustrations and making a post or comment on social media to organize. You know, when the Black Caucus, we were drafting our legislation for 2021, we met with a lot of grassroots organizations across the state of Indiana. Many of them were youth. And it was a beautiful experience because even when I was young, I didn't feel like folks listened. I didn't think people took what I had to say to heart, let alone transfer it into policy. So I just want to just encourage this generation to continue to do that. You and I were on a Zoom with Dame Dash and Congressman Andre Carson and so many others. But there was a young lady that was from Indianapolis that was on that Zoom that I was thoroughly impressed with her organizing skills and how to inspire a generation. Now, when we talk about leadership, you don't have to have a title. You don't have to be an elected official to be considered or to be thought of as a leader. You know, true leaders create other leaders. That was something I've always been taught. So even if it's just grassroots organizing and talking about the issues that impact a neighborhood, that leadership is needed. But even when we look at running for office and participating in that political process, we need those type of folks that have that type of structure, that type of thinking to say, I want to do what's right for the people, period. Not for special interest groups, not for a certain population, but for everyone. Have a fair playing field, make sure there's equity in education, make sure there's equity in how we pay individuals, and so many other areas. And I can go on and on, so you got to kind of jump in because there's so much I could talk about, especially what's taking place in session today in the Indiana General Assembly. Let's look at what's happening with the Indigo project. And when they're trying to literally pass legislation to disrupt public transportation.
Oh, yeah.
To me, that's a direct attack on minorities that don't have the resources, or the low income that don't have the resources to get to a job. And you can't just shift and say, we're moving to a more innovative society, so let them use Uber and Lyft. That's not feasible. That's not realistic when you have a viable public transportation system that's supposed to serve the needs of the public.
Yeah. And Senator, I'm happy you mentioned Indigo. This is your another ask here for the night. Please call your legislators. Please see who are the ones that are in limbo of either supporting and denying this legislation. Oppose it. And I want to say, where even to the extent of legislation that comes, the systematic indirect impacts of this is detrimental, especially to Black communities. So here in Indianapolis and working on our city's northeast side, we got 3 zip codes: 46218, 46226, 46205. That's the beat to the ground, and we do everything we can to come together. Now, with that Indigo legislation, in particular Purple Line, that's going down the legit heart of our community. While it's great, they can talk about innovation, think about the suppression as well that will happen when there's federal funding. Federal funding. to help this community revitalize the underground infrastructure. No one thinks about that. Where we've had high fatality rates due to pedestrians getting hit from the lack of sidewalks. That's also what some of these legislators are going to do, who will also see that of consistent paveways when we have individuals coming in and out of our community. How can we, in my world, do everything we can from community development to develop and attract more to want to come in, but we don't have essential things, even like mass transit. So it's a little plug, my testimony. I'll make sure I do everything to testify and let people know we don't need it. So this is my ask in this space, to do everything we can to oppose that legislation. So the impact's real. And then lastly, I think before we wrap up our conversation, being very respectful to you, Senator, being a very big person. As Democrats, it's so important to realize the impact we make. We're so bold, innovative, creative, we're collaborative, that Democrat isn't always just in the politics, but we have change makers that don't always have to be an elected official seat. We can go, if you know your neighborhoods, utilize your talents to go run campaigns for those. Let's do that. Right. We have others that have taken the power of maybe being mobilized, like in my case, from social justice movement, to go back to my neighborhood, and I'm going to go march the streets and help push innovative change. Yeah. I shared that. And Senator, if we can wrap up, you provide some good words of wisdom, we can wrap up one. But my thought is this: what can we do to keep our momentum alive 365? Black excellence to us in this fight is not just for February. When we talk about the history, how can we now we're doing everything we can to see our support even in our neighborhoods, especially our Black communities today. Do you want to highlight some words of wisdom about encouraging people even outside the political space to be good Democrats in our communities across the Hoosier State?
Ashley, you hit it on the head. I would summarize that as service. Yes. In serving the community. Right now, we're still in the pandemic, like we mentioned earlier, and we're still seeing long lines at food pantries. We're still seeing unemployment rate rise. We're still seeing children struggle with learning. Mm-hmm. There's going to be so many things that over the years we're going to have to figure out the overall impact. But for the Black community, mm-hmm. these things had already been issues. It's nothing new. It's just growing worse. And COVID has revealed so much frailty in our systems that it's when things are broken to a point of is not able to function is when it's time to rebuild. It's time to rebuild systems. And it's going to take people on a grassroots level to demand change to happen. And yes, it's going to be organizing for political power and influence. It's being engaged at school board meetings, school board elections, not sitting on the sidelines on the off year of elections when it's not a presidential cycle or a gubernatorial cycle or a U.S. Senate cycle, but those county seats, those city council seats, those mayor's races, all of these various races that take place where we see a dip in voter participation. We would change the game if we increase voter turnout. We would change the game in terms of demanding change to take place all the way from the White House to the State House. And, you know, as we prepare to wrap up, I just want to say No one person, no one elected official, no one precinct committee person, no one county chair, no one state chair, no one school board member, no one legislator is going to do it. Every single person in our party has a role to play. I've seen it when I traveled the state of Indiana, and I've seen it, I hear in the voices of people that's looking for ways to get engaged. And I tell them, I say, I'm a Democrat because I align with the values and the principles that this party has celebrated for a number of years, right? But you joining this party or you being a part of this party adds on to our fabric of getting the job done for every single person across this entire state. So by it being Black History Month, you know, it's inspiring to look back in history, to see the struggle, to see people overcome it. And one thing I would say too, that all of these leaders, they were young. The people that we study and read about, they were young leaders. They sacrificed so much to pave a way for us to be here today, to have the freedoms we have, to have the ability to serve in the way that we do. We cannot take it for granted. We have to honor their lives by our service.
So important. And it leads to one last illustration that comes to mind, and it's actually pulling in an African proverb. And I explicitly want to talk about African proverb because there's this word called Sankofa. As we reach back, we move forward. Let's reach back and see that as Blacks, and especially as we are making Black history, that a lot of the tools and solutions have been done from the past. How can we learn from those examples? But as we reach back, we're pulling someone else forward. That's the heart and principle about being Democrat, because we're not going to leave anybody behind. And we live it through action, not just say it with words and confuse people with smoke and mirrors. But lastly, hopefully you know the conversation for Blackness ain't now. Be comfortable being uncomfortable, forging the way through allyships of seeing if you don't see someone representing or is making Black history at some tables, be okay saying, hey, let's pause this because I rather respect the work we can do together by seeing everyone be together. And we can make some great things. You encouraged me, Senator Melton, on many forefronts outside of being a phenomenal legislator. You emulate what being a good family unit is. And that alone, the mentorship you provide for individuals all across this nation. I just wanted to celebrate you before we end up here today. And by ending up, please make sure you check out ndims.org/get-involved. Also, NDIMS on social media platforms. We're here. And then Senator Melton, would you like to help close this out with final remarks?
Once again, I want to thank the state party for highlighting Black History Month and making it a priority. For many Blacks across the state, Black history is every single day. And we have to honor the lives of those that paved the way for us, that continue to fight and struggle and do it with love, do it with a sincere passion to serve our community. And we'll be honoring their lives and the legacies that they laid for us. And right now, I just want to thank you, Ashley, for what you're doing in Indianapolis and your leadership.
Thank you.
As well. So
appreciate it.
I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
All right.
Bye.